You're listening to the Work That Matters podcast, and I'm your host, Shannon Elizabeth Eastman. And these are conversations that take place at the intersection of personal and business growth. I am, as usual, in my office in Rathmines. I'm over in Dublin, Ireland, looking out the window at some lovely greenery. And I'm joined today by Cathy Presland. Cathy is joining me from the UK. She is a leadership transformation coach. It is a pleasure to know her. I subscribe to all of her material and I love seeing her in my feed. She's just got such a presence. She's poised and she's got wisdom, and I really appreciate her insights and her thoughts. So as a leadership coach, she works with clients across a range of organizations, but broadly in the area of social change. Now, before becoming a coach, one of the cool things that I love about her is that she worked for a long time in economics and public policy. So 7 years as a development economist in South Africa. Quite cool. So aside from her coaching practice today, she volunteers a lot for a number of pro bono initiatives that are near and dear to her heart. I thoroughly enjoyed this exchange we had on leading from within, finding this place within you with which you can sit inside conflict and remain poised and clear and calm, even though all around you is uncomfortable. Difficult conversations, particularly the examples in here from corporate and engaging senior management and individuals that you work with and for. So it is my intention that you enjoy this conversation and discovering Cathy if you haven't heard of Cathy before this show. And maybe there's something in here that will shift your perspective on what's possible for whatever's going on in your world right now. So without further ado, I am delighted to let you in on this conversation that I'm having with Cathy Presland. It is so great to have you here.
Shannon, it's so nice to be here.
Cathy Presland, leadership and yourself, or more specifically, leading from within. I am looking forward to seeing how this conversation plays out today. And you've brought me this really great quote to set up our conversation. A man we're all familiar with, but I didn't know until you mentioned it a few minutes ago that it's more than 100 years old. Be the change that you want to see in the world. Specifically 1913, Gandhi is quoted with inviting people to consider the role that they play when it comes to changing the world. And the question that you brought into this conversation is why? What is it about that statement that still rings true 100 years later? And what is the relationship between leadership, change, and yourself? And maybe Gandhi was onto something.
Yeah.
She said,
well, do you know, I always think with these things that it's the quote. Obviously he said some words that are on a piece of paper. Now we're reciting them, but I think what happens is that it resonates with something in us. So we hear it, but we hear it because it sounds true in some way, or it sounds like an inquiry that we want to have, or it sounds like something we've heard before. It's not like a learning. It's a reminder of something that we already know. Yeah. And we talked about this in our previous conversation. Like, it's a reminder of something that we already know. I had a conversation with a guy last week and we were exchanging some resources around climate change. And he said he'd been to some fancy conference, not an area I know a lot about. And he said there were all these 3 or 4 very high profile speakers. And the final guy said something, and he said it just hit him as something that was so true. And it's exactly that. It's when we hear something and we think maybe we don't know what we've heard, or maybe we can't quite make sense of it, but we feel it. We feel that there's some impact, I guess. Just to tie us up to one of the other topics we've put on the table. We feel
there's a narrative in the Jungian psychology world around intuition, and the idea that when you hear something for the very first time that you've never heard before, but you're hearing it in a sense of knowing it to be true, that it's an intuitive part of you that recognizes itself. Yeah. I love that you brought this quote in, because you're right. We recite it, but we recite it because it resonates. Why? When it's only up until recently, I'm going to make this about me. I was about to say, why do people, but I'm going to own it. It's only up until recently, and maybe in the last 3 years, that I changed my own narrative, which was, I need to make a difference. I want to change something or someone or some circumstance to, I just want to change what's going on in here. And I no longer have an attachment to changing what's going on out there. But that's only recent for me. And yet I've known this quote and I've resonated with this quote for well over a decade, maybe longer. But it's only recently that I'm starting to be able to embody it.
Go deeper with it. I see something different in it. There's another quote. I'm hopeless. I'm like, so not the quote person, but I want to say it's T.S. Eliot, which it may not be at all. But there's another quote about traveling the world and coming back and seeing the place that we started from with fresh eyes. And that's kind of two things though in what you said. Is one is I think it's really important, and I say this is a general leadership lesson, is the idea of looking into our own experience of something versus our kind of rehearsed and tried on ideas, the things that we automatically reach to say, I think creates a different conversation. Not that one's right or wrong, but just to recognize that there's a real difference between a kind of intellectual conversation or an ideas level conversation and something that comes from our own experience. And I'm going to say, because this is where we are in end of June 2020, but this is particularly significant, I think, when there are topics that can be quite sensitive, that we often reach to our ideas and then we debate ideas and I'm right, you're wrong. We get into a kind of a level of whose idea is the best. Versus what can I experience when I actually look at you, whatever I make of that, and get to know you, and how can we in this moment be present with the experience of being ourselves. And so coming down to our own experience, I think it sets up very different conversations.
Well, let's take this into business, because you are a coach, an advisor, a consultant in the leadership space within business. I definitely work in the business area. So when we're taking maybe a recent example or a recent experience you've had with someone in the last month or two, where there is an opportunity for the lead from within, which is a language you also brought into this conversation, the opportunity to reflect on the internal leadership that's going on and maybe altering or exploring or facilitating a deeper understanding of it so that it alters the outside world. Can I say it like that?
Yeah, well, absolutely, because it does alter the outside world, because the way that we look at the world, and even taking that quote and actually you've described having a different experience with it. I'll come back to the leadership example, but being prepared to look at things from our experience, look at them fresh, and not say, oh yeah, I looked at it then, that's what it meant when I looked at it 10 years ago, means that we're likely to see something different. So we could look at that quote in the sense of be the change, let's go and be an activist, let's go and do all sorts of exciting things. Or we could look at it as, who am I showing up as every day? And whether I'm in so you're pointing at me just for the audio listeners.
Yeah.
The person in the supermarket, I'll perhaps send you the link at some separate point, but I had an incredible experience with some woman she was behind the checkout in Marks and Spencer's food hall. And then we had some exchange, and she kind of grabbed my hand and told me this deeply significant personal story. And it was really beautiful. It was like really beautiful just in that tiny moment of exchange. And yeah, so obviously I don't know what Gandhi meant. I can only say how it resonates with me and what it sets up in me. But I'm going to give you an example. My client I spoke to this week, just because these are always the ideas that are most fresh, but he is in a structure in an organization, quite a large organization, and he reports at one line of the hierarchy, and in a kind of parallel line in a more senior position, there's what sounds like what somebody would describe as a fairly difficult sort of person who he believes is, empire building and wants to tell them what to do and ultimately take them over. And we had a whole, we've had previous conversations about this and about being able to kind of set aside from all of the things that we think about this person and actually really looking at them, like really this idea of coming fresh. When I really look at this person and I just take away all of my judgments about them, what they're trying to do, what that might mean for me and my team, like really look at them. And he's seen a lot of things in the situation very differently. And he had a conversation with such person kind of a couple of levels above him, who I think also manages the other person. And he said they had a really beautiful conversation because he just felt, first of all, that he got a lot more understanding about what was going on for this other person. But then they reached a point at the end of the conversation where the senior person said, look, I just want you to support, this person X over here. And my clients that he said, I don't know why I said this, but I just said, you know what, I absolutely hear you, but hand on heart in this moment, I'm finding that really difficult to do. And so I'm not going to pretend to do something, but I'm just going to take it away and, let it sit and see what comes up. And he said it was very different than, it was honest. We're talking about honesty basically in conversations, and the idea of not just saying, yes, of course I'm going to support him, or not pretending that it was this impossible situation that needed to be resolved, but just saying, in this moment, I have a lot of compassion for this person, understanding and empathy, and all that being true, I just can't quite bring myself to honestly, with 100% authenticity, say that I am behind you.
What does it take? What needs to happen for someone to be able to be in that moment and say with that level of authenticity and vulnerability and honesty what he said?
It takes, what we pulled out is, I think it takes a couple of different things. Let's see if we can put this into a coherent list. It first of all takes a sense that, and I think these things we've all got, a sense of knowing how am I being in this moment? Is this something which is coming from this, this kind of.
That sounds like self-awareness.
It's self-awareness, but
the pursuit of ever-increasing states of self-awareness.
Self-awareness, I don't want to kind of say that like it's we know what self-awareness is, because there's also a difference with it that's coming to mind with another client who is very big on self-awareness, and he is always wanting to look more in the direction of self-awareness. And so sometimes what I point him to is like, what is this self that you want to be so aware of? And is it something that's a kind of narrative in your head of this person? I want to say his name, I won't say his name, but is it like, what is this self? Or is there something underneath that where the kind of the who I am at a deeper level shows up?
I'm doing a degree in Jungian psychology, and so it's on the brain, and I see a lot of the world through that filter at the moment. And I've also done an enormous amount of work with Dr. John Demartini. So that's probably the most dominant filter I have of the world. But as you're saying or querying this, who is this self that you are keen to become aware of? That's a brilliant question. And I almost want to make the whole conversation about that now. That is such a great question. And as I'm reflecting on it for myself, I'm definitely an advocate of studying the mirror so that I can spot more and more of my blind spots. And now I'm going, well, whose blind spots and what blind spots and why do they matter and why are they important? And I think from a Jungian filter, it's the shadow self, the part of us that we don't necessarily want to embrace or integrate. We almost want to distance ourselves from because we've labeled it at some point as it's not good for business. I jest, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And then in the Demartini world, it's an incomplete perception where we only want to see half the world. We only want sunshine, never rain, only day, never night. Only up, never down. And it's allowing both.
And that's very prevalent in a kind of Western, I say West, I generalize. That seems to me to be, I'm not an expert in societies, but it seems to me to be very prevalent in a Western culture, the idea that good is better than bad, happy is better than sad, this sunshine is better than rain. And the reality of the human experience, as I understand it, is that it's like the weather, all states come and go. And sure, I might not like the rain. I was out on my bike actually it was last week, and I checked the weather app, misread. I've now got 3 weather apps on my phone, but I read the weather app that I had on my phone, which told me it was going to rain at 3:00. So I went out at 11:00 and got absolutely soaked in this thunderstorm and had to shelter because I thought I was going to get struck by lightning. I mean, I was wet, I was cold, I was scared that I might get struck by lightning. And yet that's what was happening in that moment. And for sure, it led me to laugh about it and to get some more weather apps on my phone. But we kind of do that with ourselves. We make it that, what can I do to never go out in the rain? And I can refine the information that I get so that I reduce my chances of going out in the rain. But the reality is that it's only as good as the weather app, and any forecast is always a forecast about the future, which is always unknown. So I don't need to make judgments about whether I'm in the rain or not in the rain, or in the sunshine or not in this. I don't need to be scared of the rain. And I think that's what that kind of duality setting up, that kind of the way that we think, we should avoid sadness, we should avoid grief, and we do that. It's like I've had family members and friends who've died. I've worked with colleagues who it's almost like there's this grief period, and then after that we just would rather not talk about it, rather than seeing actually that's not how grief works. It comes and it goes, and maybe it lessens, but it's not like, there's not an end point on it. We're in this cycling of experience.
Go back to your question from about 5 minutes ago. You had a client who's very keen on self-awareness, and your question to him was, who is this self that you want to be so much more aware of? Is that because there's a perception on your part that in itself is trying to separate and create a duality? Or am I following the wrong?
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. And I think it is, because I think there is this not so much that it's a self, because I don't think it's a fixed thing, but we create like a virtual reality. That's maybe a slightly different way of looking at it, that we create a virtual reality. And so we see, we can put a different DVD, or we can take a turn, and something creates because of the turn that we've taken. But we're only ever seeing the virtual reality. And yet behind the virtual reality is something, whatever it is, whether we see it as a subconscious brain, whether we see it as a spiritual power, like whatever we see, there's something underneath and kind of driving what it is that is creating the show out in the world. Yeah, which I know will make sense to you on a lot of different levels. So to come back to the kind of the like, how do we have these honest and authentic conversations? The first thing I think is to have an awareness of, do I feel like I'm playing in the VR game? Which is like, who wouldn't? That's like fantastic fun. But to have a sense that, yeah, okay, this is not completely true for me. If I say that I'm going to support this person, like I really want to, but do you know what? It's just 100% not completely true. And it can become true. But this is, and not in the sense that I just don't like, not again to kind of play in the virtual reality game, he's the bad guy, but to know that my virtual reality game is just a bit noisy at the moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But there's an innate desire to want that opportunity or that moment to take form. It's not there right now, and acknowledging it whilst addressing that there's an intention for it to appear and show up. But when I think about the business owners and the business leaders, particularly in the firms that have layers and layers and layers of management, there's an enormous impact on culture, on the individual culture of the company, the leadership at the top, and potentially the person that they're directly reporting into. And so I almost imagine it like this, it's almost like pressure coming down from at least 3 different angles onto an individual who wants to step up, who wants to evolve into some form of growth. And what does it take for that individual who's in that environment to become present, to find their voice, to be courageous enough to articulate it in even if it's a micro environment that they're not sure it's going to land in the way that they really want it to, and yet do it anyway.
Yeah. Well, it may not land. It
almost never lands.
Yeah. Because everybody's living in their own individual virtual reality world. Yeah. And like, that's the kind of the other piece of the, I can't remember now what the original question was, about an example about leadership. So first of all is recognizing that in yourself. Like I'm in more of like my higher self, my authentic self. And I can still, I'm still aware of the virtual reality and the noise, but I can get a sense of the difference here. And it's like sort of, I'm watching a film. It's like when my teenager, actually, I've got my youngest son's at university, and he plays on these games like all the time. And yet, if I call him for tea, he hears me, he might ignore me, but he knows the difference between his game and conversation with, even though his game's much more fun in his life at the moment. And then the second piece of it, I think, is recognizing that everybody, this is more pertinent to the last question, is that this is exactly what's going on for everybody. So we're in this kind of semi-lockdown thing, and we were laughing a lot actually with the same person who's relating this conversation to me, because he said he sat in this conversation with this person 2 levels above him in the hierarchy, and he said he could see, like, it's almost like he could see this guy describing, it sounded like a James Patterson novel. I was like saying, I'm so drama stuff, tell me about the drama. We were laughing because he said what the guy was saying made sense to him, to the senior manager. And there's this conspiracy in this organization, and they're going to do this, and if they don't do this, he said he had this like whole saga, and it went on and on and on. And he's sitting there looking at this guy thinking, wow, that's really amazing and creative, but it's like not real. You know that? He didn't say, like, it's not real, you know that, don't you? But he could see this guy in his very exciting virtual reality game. And so when we can see that we all live like that, and we don't need to get pulled into other people's drama, and we also can see that any reaction they may have to us is not coming from, our authentic selves and their authentic self. It's coming from how much they're living in that moment in their kind of VR game. Yeah. And so, like, that all sounds very conceptual, but as a helpful practical tip is, and this works in all conversations, like conversations with teenagers, especially if clients come to me and they've got to have feedback with difficult members of staff, or the meeting with the senior manager in this case, that just know when you're both in that slightly more settled state of mind, and know when one or other of you, or if there are many of you, like, notice how much you or they may be in the drama, because the more settled a state of mind you can be in, the easier it is to say, I'm going to put my hand on my heart, I'm going to tell you where I am, I don't have any expectations, but I just love it if we could explore this topic a little bit, whatever it is. It helps us look at something, objectively outside of this sense of personal self that we create.
It's also, it's many things, but it's also deeply powerful in not separating yourself, but in marking yourself as someone who operates at this particular level in quote unquote crisis. Mm-hmm. I'm remembering a woman that I worked with in 2002, oil and gas company, Centrica, British company. And there is an enormous amount of office politics and drama, as you'd expect in any large organization. And this one in the marketing and PR department, maybe a little bit more, just given the personality types there, and myself included. So I was one of those back in 2002. I was quite animated and quite prone to drama. And I had a very quick fight or flight reaction to any sort of stress, and I didn't have the strategies or the tools to manage it otherwise. But there was one person, Jessica, extraordinary woman to have in our presence, because whilst we were all animating our drama and reacting in hyperbolic ways, she was doing exactly what you're describing your client is doing. She would become very present. I didn't know that at the time, but I remember just staring at her going, is she human? Does she belong here? I don't understand.
What Zen retreat has she just come back from?
that is,
you can see how helpful it is. How helpful it is
calming,
in any kind of, yeah.
And even though I didn't have any words or a level of understanding to recognize what role she was playing or how she was going about it, it was so different.
You recognized that there was something in it.
I recognized and drawn to it and attracted to it. But yet I just would look at her like she had 3 eyes. I couldn't. Yeah. It was so foreign. I'm still in touch with her today, and I've learned a little bit more about who she is and how she goes about things. And it's exactly as you described in this moment. There's an animated self, and there's a very centered, connected self. And when she notices the people around her animating, it's her cue to become more centered and more within herself, and to operate from her heart space, which I look back on I remember had such a profound impact on me. 2002, I remember the calm that just rippled across the team as she just operated in her heart space. And we just all kind of eventually just calmed down and went,
mm-hmm.
And
what I want to say on that, just like for people listening, is that it sounds like, gosh, how can I learn to do that? How can I learn to be like this person who's having major impact? But it comes back to, this is who we are. And we all have this inside us. And so it's a remembering, a recognizing, a noticing, a kind of it's an attunement to those different states that we might
I love that you said attunement. Can we play with that for a second?
We can. It's a word I absolutely love, because that's what I feel like I do with clients. I'm helping them tune into that. And
if we took a very literal metaphor, because do you know the program, the Fockers, Meet the Fockers?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes I jest out of love that I was a dense Focker. Because I can own that. I can look back and say, I would observe this person and have no clue who or how. And yet I was deeply animated and lived my life, in massive success or terrible crisis and all over the place. And so seeing and hearing people talk about this innate ability that we have to tune in, I was like, what are you on? I clearly
you all have it, but I clearly miss that gene.
You what? That's not me. Until I copped on to this radio metaphor. And the radio metaphor was literally visualizing a dial on the radio, going analog, and turning it into 96.7 and listening to what shows up on there, and then moving it over to 100.9. I'm making these radio stations up. And 96.7 tunes out. It doesn't mean the radio station disappears off the face of the earth. It is very much there. But as you're listening and tuned into 100.7, you're only hearing what's coming out of that particular channel at the time, knowing full well that there's 100 other radio stations you can tune into. And so it was if 96.7 is my animated state, I now have, I practice just interrupting myself and going, this is your animated drama. You can choose to focus here and stay here on this radio station, or you can flip over to this other radio station and bring your focus and attention there. And for about 3 years, that's all I practice.
Yeah. And then, you see, when you know it's there, I mean, I love that metaphor, because also, like, you might have static, and I think what a lot of people are doing is they're actually playing with the volume button, trying to turn the static up. Like, that's no use.
Guilty as charged. For years, I was...
Well, yeah, like all of us at some point, obviously. Yeah. But the great thing about the tuning analogy with the stations is that when you know there's another station there, when you know that's how the machinery works, when you know the human self is this huge, unconscious, beautiful, innate, healthy, psychologically healthy self, and that we revert to that, then when you know that that's there, then you're more likely to, then you reach for it. Like, I've got a glass of water here, so I know it's straight for me. I've just come back from a hot cycle ride. I'm not going to think, oh, how thirsty am I on a scale? I don't need a checklist. Yeah. The thing's just right there in front of me. And I know when it's not. If I feel thirsty, I look around, like, I know there's water in the tap. So yeah. So for me, it's like that understanding, and then noticing, tuning, okay, I have this, but I don't feel like my client, I know there's this state of perfect calmness and compassion where I'll be 100% supportive with this guy. And just in this moment, like, I'm a bit mixed in my radio stations. Wow. Like, he's not, no judgment on him or the guy or whatever, but noticing that in himself. And not that he can't support the guy anyway, but just knowing in himself there's a little bit of background noise going on.
So it's my default now, the centered place that I was introduced to back in 2002 is my default. And because I get to play there more than the animated version of me, I get to discover more and more parts of myself in this very centered, very grounded space. And what I discovered there is like your man in the meeting who needed to say, I have the desire to, but my radio station's a bit fuzzy, so let's give me a moment. Exactly. I now train all my new clients, my existing clients know it. Everybody who comes into my life and is there for a prolonged period knows that we're going to have an exchange. We're all going to go away and sleep on it for a few days because that's how I process. And so I can be in a meeting where someone will say, I'd like you to support him. And I'll be like, that's great. And I'm going to take 3 days to sleep on it and let whatever wants to show up. And then we'll regroup next week. And by just making that a part of my normal everyday practice, it has changed my life. Yeah. Like, there's no stress, there's no pressure. Everybody is totally cool with it. So many people say, oh my God, I'm going to adopt that practice myself because I can see, et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to recognize what serves me in my leadership, in my internal space, allows me to be a better service to what's going on out there by default or as a byproduct.
Of course, because you have a better understanding of how we work, and so therefore you don't get distracted by a lot of other things. And that also doesn't mean that exactly your practices are the right things for somebody else, because somebody could hear that and think, oh, I'm always going to take 3 days before I make a decision. Like, no, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there's a stage of noticing. So I was on a webinar with a colleague, I can't remember if it was this week or last week now, and I had quite a busy day. It was another one of these hot days, I could feel a bit of a headache. It was in the evening and we were co-leading this thing, and I said to her, like, I just feel my head's a bit busy in this moment. And we did some exercises at the beginning to get more centered. And my head was still busy. Like, it was busy. And actually I forgot to do the timer thing on the breakout. It was just funny. And so and in the moment I was in a breakout group and I realized this is going on a lot longer. I thought we said 10 minutes and here we are, 20 minutes. And so suddenly in that, it was a split second response. I said to the guy, I'm really sorry, I have to 100% apologize, but I've got to go and now do this breakout room thing that I didn't set up. Like, it's not like I'm going to take 3 days to think about my breakout room. I knew in that it's, but I didn't have all of the, oh my gosh, I didn't feel anything other than, oh God, my head's a bit busy, I forgot to do the breakout room. Yeah. So it didn't come with the drama. So we can react fast or slow to things.
Yes.
And that checking in, and it comes from an understanding, not I'm just sort of saying that because somebody could easily hear that. I'm going to say,
no, you're right. It's not so much about the 3 days, which are for big marketing plans. It's more about ensuring that there is space made for, in my world, it's about marketing and business development, being present to what wants to appear in the moment and allowing ourselves to course correct and move with that and through that, as opposed to, here's a 6-month business development plan and we're going to rigidly stick to it. And if we don't meet these specific targets that we've now etched in stone, then we're going to consider it a failure. Here's our plan that we're going to follow and simultaneously be present to. And as things emerge, we will pivot accordingly and we will course correct, and it will be for the overall betterment of the plan, business, initiative. So it's being present to it. And
it's knowing that, I'm going to use an example here as well, but again, I'm going to point again back to understanding, because at some kind of conscious or subconscious level, probably conscious, but you haven't articulated it in this moment, that new ideas show up all of the time and that we have future wisdom, and how could we possibly plan out everything, because that's just not how things work in life. And so of course we want a plan, we want to all be on the same page, we want to have some understanding of roles. That's helpful. We go on holiday, we book a flight, whatever. And I go on my bike ride, I look at my weather app and, so it started raining. What am I going to do in that moment? Am I going to stick to my plan? Am I going to, it's exactly that. And so new situations bring new, we might just have new ideas because we create space for them, or it may be that circumstances flex and you can be present in the moment, as you said. But it's coming from you knowing that that's how things work, not that you are there controlling all the little levers on the plan.
It's actually,
control the ones you can, but there's a deeper understanding. Can you feel that?
I'm looking for the word, because you're right. It's not about controlling, but what is it then? It's about allowing. It's about recognizing.
Did we talk about playing last time?
We did. I bring that back. I love playing.
We say last time because we had a little pre-chat. It's not like, this is sort of whole secret conversations that we're not letting anybody in on, but we could have those too. It's the kind of all in and also allowing. I think it's the sort of both and thing that again, like my teenager with his PlayStation game, because he goes crazy for it and he's shouting loudly and getting very animated, and he knows it's a game. And so if, somebody phones in with a better idea, and that's not saying that we should treat marketing like PlayStation games, but it's the knowing that it's more productive and more fun, and to be all in. Like, why wouldn't we be all in with whatever it is, the marketing plan, the thing we've set up? I'm doing a new project with a friend, and we get very excited about it, and we've got lots of ideas, and we can say, it could go here, and we'll reach to this organization. We've got, we're all in with it. And I know that all of that's in our conversation in the moment. It may or may not play out, and especially because it's a new project, obviously we're sort of less developed and we've got less experience to draw on. But so it's the both and. It's the throwing ourselves all into the things that we're excited about and aligned with, and knowing that one or both of us, or circumstances, or third person could come up, and the responsiveness.
I like what you said, and I'm not sure I hit record in time.
Oh no!
No, I did at the beginning of our chat. But
okay.
I'm not sure if you said it after I hit or before I hit. So I want to remind you of it when you said, it's about, and I'm paraphrasing, so do correct me. Being in service to it, being in service to life. That there is an it which wants to be, which wants to emerge, which wants to be present, and we can be the vehicle with which it moves through and operates in, or not. I think I was telling you the last month when we chatted before my dental and other things took place. I was in my young class, Jungian psychology class, and the lecturer was talking about this very thing. And this was the first time I heard it said this way. And I think I was laughed at by the class because I queried it a lot. When the lecturer said, there is a cosmos and a chaos, and there is a divine order that governs both, and they are with two sides of the same thing. And there is a very present and real part of this divine order that wants you to allow it. And if you don't, it will do something to get your attention. And if you persist in ignoring it, this intuitive impulse, this Barbara Marx Hubbard, I think is her name, she refers to it as an evolutionary impulse. That if you continue to ignore it, my Jungian psychology lecturer said, it will kill you. You'll just walk in front of a bus and die, because it's like, all right, we can't get it done with you. We'll find someone else. Goodbye. And they put my hand up. Like, are you talking metaphorically? This is the first time I've heard that, your unconscious self, if you don't play, like literally play and be in service to it, it will just kill you off.
Well, why do you, and I mean, people might be listening to this thinking she's talking about cosmos and chaos and universes and divine orders, and like, I just want some tips to make my business go better. Like, you can hear it metaphorically and you can hear it literally, and you can hear it as I've just come back from I was actually out with the dog, so we're going very slowly in the forest. I take my bikes. I've got some degenerated discs in my spine, so I don't like to walk a long time, and so we just did, it's 12 miles sounds like a lot, it's not a lot on a bike in a flat forest, but I'm been a big fan over the years of this particular kind of low heart rate training, where you don't put a lot of stress on your body, and so you don't get all of the kind of stress hormone reactions. And I came to this because I was basically kept injured. I used to be a runner, and I kept having injury after injury, and this is very common in kind of non-professional athletes, amateur athletes, we just think that's part of the game, it's part of life. We're going to suffer for our sport or whatever it is. And it's why people have burnout in the office. It's I have another client who I think she was off work for about 6 months, and she's recently returned, and they wanted to have this coaching because they're all a bit like, how do we talk to this person? It's a bit sensitive. Like it's exactly the tuning into the one channel on the radio and thinking that's the only way to do things. I've just got to go faster and faster. I've got to do it in this way, and not realizing that it's one channel on a radio station. And if you don't think it's doing you any good, then why don't you just tune into something else? Not recognizing that we are the radio in this metaphor. Yeah. And so why wouldn't we just tune into another station? So you can see it metaphorically or literally as a universe, or you can see it at another level of my bones are rubbing against each other, and at the end of the day I'm just going to have an injury which means I can't run anymore, and which
out. Yeah. I first of all, thank you for making this analogy play on both sides of the fence. The reason why I was so taken aback by it is because my old self, so back in 2012, 2013, I was the person who was doing 100 hours a week, building a big business, winning all the accounts, going great guns, scale. I did not know any better, but I was persistently ignoring a whole bunch of signs. And ended up, not metaphorically, but quite literally, in bed for a year, very sick with the C word and all sorts, endocrine, adrenals, everything that kind of says, you've not listened to me. You've continued to operate inside states of stress. Yeah. So we're done. And we're going to force you now to find another radio station. And so that also was reflective, or I was reflecting on when I consider that there is more than one radio station, but I didn't know it existed.
When you know you're the radio, then it
changes everything. I had no idea. Yeah. And also, I'm from Canada originally. And so growing up in a North American culture and environment, there's this entrepreneurial fall down 7 times, get up 8, although ironically that is from China. But we have this mindset of like, keep going. That's the way of the winner, which I embraced wholeheartedly to my detriment, because I was able to affirm and declare louder than the quiet voice inside, so I can almost drown it out. So I was actually, the term dense fucker. Like, I lovingly go, Shannon, she just didn't have a clue back then. And I see it now. And I'm 1,000 Shannons from that particular version. And God bless her. Wow.
But isn't it interesting? That's why I kind of, at the very beginning, we talked about listening and what we're listening to, and noticing, and the self and the not self, because you would have said you were very self-aware, I'm sure, at that point in your life. And you were probably very self-aware, an expert in one radio station, without realizing that, that's just a
I love what you just did there. That is really well played, but you're absolutely right. I would have told you that I was self-aware, and I would have actually judged you for not seeing how aware and accomplished I was. It's a true story. I can laugh at it now, but at the time I would have been dead serious. And yet that was the exact trajectory that, took me into a hospital environment and then kept me there for a year. So, wow. Yeah.
And at some level you knew it, I'm sure, at some level, even though a colleague of mine...
I did know it. And I think if I were to be completely authentic and honest, looking back at the 2012, I'm not sure I could have articulated it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. But I was aware. I was very aware. But I was also terrified of slowing down.
And not knowing that there was another way. I think that's also sometimes, I remember a time when my oldest child was very young, and we just moved back to the UK, and everything just seemed kind of overwhelming. I was in this big job and he was having to go to nursery in this Western thing of, you know, like, you've got to work all these hours. We've moved back from Africa, or everything's much more child-centered. And it just seemed overwhelming. And so you feel like you've got to make sense of the, you know, you talked about culture, and this is a slightly wider sense of, you feel like, let me make sense of this thing and figure out how I can, like, do this better, without realizing that we just made this whole thing up. This thing called work, even, like, we made it up at some level. And yeah, sure, I can figure it out, and I can, you know, win at Risk or Monopoly or whatever. I can figure out the game, but just like we wouldn't want to kill somebody over a board game, hopefully, we know the difference between engaging and playing full out, and that it isn't who we are. It isn't real. It isn't the sense of, we don't lie on our deathbed. I think I said this to my client, actually, the same one, on a different occasion. He was talking about meetings and everybody makes these. I said, nobody lies on their deathbed and says they wish they'd made more snippy comments in meetings. Like, you can make the snippy comments and it can be really fun at the time, but really, is that what life's for? You know?
Yeah. It's such a different view from this side. It's such a different view. I'm aware of time. And we normally do 40 minutes.
Actually, I misread my computer clock. I thought it said 35 minutes. It's 55. Yeah. Is there something you want to kind of wrap up with, or what would be a kind of piece to come back to? I'm not. But it's not talk for ages. But I'm not. I don't have to go in this very quick minute.
I wanted to come back to being the change that you want to see in the world, and I'm curious about, you know, what does it mean to you today? And what do you extrapolate from it?
I'm thinking, you haven't cut me off. Do you know, there's something that I only really saw recently, or I only saw it last week, actually, when I was talking to somebody, that I had, I worked in government for a long time, and I've always been involved in things to do with, you know, doing good, I guess, generally you'd say, or I've been kind of loosely involved in supporting people in politics for quite a long time. And I reached a point of kind of disillusionment after the last election in the UK, which was, I can't remember now, about 6-9 months ago, and thought, God, what the fuck am I doing here? This is like, I felt so distant from what was actually going on in the country, and, you know, kind of that sort of sense of powerlessness that I'm sure we will experience with lots of different areas of life. But I only realized, so I stepped back, I thought, okay, this is, like, what I'm doing is not working, clearly. So I stepped out of it and thought, I'm going to focus on different things. And I only realized last week, this is like 6-9 months later, that I was describing this to somebody, describing some of the newer projects that I'm working on. And I realized that I had an attachment to an outcome that I thought me supporting these things was in. And of course we say, well, of course, Cathy, of course we do things in arenas like politics or anywhere. We do them so that we can have this certain kind of government, so that, you know, blah, blah, blah. We make a lot of stuff up about where that goes, this kind of James Patterson drama in the head scenario. But it looks really real. It looks like, no, that one's not James Patterson drama in the head. Other authors are available. Actually, I don't particularly like him, but you know, it looks like the kind of, so it looked I didn't realize that was what I was doing. And so what that means to me, I think, in this moment is the kind of organic connection that everything's got. It's going to sound very vague because I haven't articulated it quite in this way, but you know, you're talking about the cosmos and the chaos, and the way that looks to me is that we're in this kind of unified system in some way that I sort of laugh at a little bit at people who think I'm going to be an individual, and it's like saying I'm only going to breathe in my own oxygen molecules, and these are mine, and you know, I'm not seeing that actually that's just
with you. I'm definitely not sharing with them.
I'm not sharing them with you, and they're not going to be like we live in an atmosphere that is, you know, okay, we could say we're in this container of the earth if you want to look at it physically, but to me it seems like this life thing, whatever it is, whether we call it society, whether we call it whatever, there's an organic system, and I mean that spiritual, it's a kind of spiritual, there's an organic nature to the spiritual system of being alive. And so any moment I want things to move in a certain direction, I am back in my virtual reality game. I'm trying to play out to a conclusion that looks better than another conclusion. and I'm losing sight of that. This is for me. This is how I see it. I'm losing sight of the fact that we're all in this system together, and therefore the more important piece is, how do we be better all of the time in our momentary connections, in our, in the choices that we make, to have governments who make decisions for us, because as individuals we're very bad at making long-term choices. Like, how do we be both in the moment and in the very long term? I lose anytime I think this is better than this other area. And this is what I was doing with my involvement in politics. I hadn't seen it quite in that way until last week. I saw something new about it that I hadn't realised, that even though I didn't think I thought I was being all, enlightened and intelligent. And no, I actually thought one route was, and I still think that to a degree, that one route is better than another route, and that certain people are better than others. I still think that, but now I can see it more clearly.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
It does. I love the giggle after enlightened. Sometimes when I think that I'm enlightened, I go and visit my family.
They say that, don't they, go and have Christmas with your family?
Oh yeah. I just need to go over for the afternoon for a cup of tea, and I leave quite humbled. But I like the idea that there is this organic co-creation that's taking place. Yeah. And the moment that we perceive our way is better, then that's almost cause for reflection to say, is it? And where is that coming from? And how do I believe that? And how do I know it's true? Yeah. And Barbara, there's this great, brilliant woman. She's passed recently. Barbara Marx Hubbard. I just can't get enough of her. She talks about this evolutionary impulse. And her statement is very simple. When you're going about your day, and you feel the need to, I keep using the word animate, feel the need to animate, then what you're doing is you're drowning out this intuition, evolutionary impulse that's actually inviting you to do something different. And if you just consider turning into it and saying yes, then that gives whatever organically co-created thing is taking place to say, okay, got it, and let's go for the whole as opposed to the individual. And so for me, in everyday practical activities, it's being present to, what is the voice, that intuitive voice inside me saying? And am I in alignment with it? And right now, that's kind of all I've got. But it's making life move in this state of flow.
Yeah. Or it's at least knowing when you're in the flow, knowing when you're in the calm waters or the stormy waters.
At this point of the river, calm.
Yeah.
I have no attachment that it needs to be like this for the next 100 years.
Yeah, because it won't be. Out in thunderstorms or whatever, like metaphorical thunderstorms, like they're there.
Yeah,
and knowing that you bring all of your other. You said like that's it at the moment, but it's not it, because you bring all of the other stuff with you. So all of your, like, I've just been out on a bike. I don't have to stop and think, how am I going to ride this bike? It's in me. And I can trust in, go on.
Trust is going to be another conversation that you and I have. I cannot wait to do that one. Cathy, it has been fantastic having you here. I love this conversation. Lead from within, and the practical ways to catch yourself, practice it, and develop it. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being here.
You are so welcome. You're so welcome, Shannon. Thank you.
The Work That Matters podcast, it's brought to you by ShannonEastman.com.